Hi, this is Jamie, and welcome to my book review of 2023. Now, whenever this is uploaded, it is going to be the new year. I don't know how many times I've recorded this video and re-recorded it and just hated it. So, this is probably going to be my last time I'm going to be recording this, and whatever happens, happens. So, just as a disclaimer, I'm not a professional book reviewer. I am just a person that wants to be able to reflect back on the books that I've read this year and share it with my friends and family. So I made a goal for myself ever since graduating school to start reading books. School kind of ruined books for me. They weren't as fun anymore. So last year I read about 7 or 8 books, which is very good. Considering that I was reading 0 or maybe 1 per year. But this year, I read 28 books. It could have been 29, but I'm just going to save it for this year of 2024. So, without further ado, let's get started. Just letting you know, I'm only going to be kind of reviewing 10 titles, not all 28 books. I cannot fit that into one video. There's too much to talk about. I'll just include them at the very end and just how I personally felt about them. I'm not going to go into what they're about and so on and so forth. And they'll probably make people very angry about some of the titles that I have chosen to kind of dismiss. But anyway, the first book that I actually read this year, and the first one that I'm going to include on this book review, it is called There by Tommy Orange, and it is a historical fiction. Tommy Orange just talks about a diverse group of Native Americans living in Oakland, California, and they're all preparing for a powwow. And he ends up writing all these characters and how they're all somewhat connected, but he does show their individuality and shows their heritage and their identity and how history has really impacted them. And it really does show a raw portrayal of the challenges faced by urban Native Americans in the 21st century and what it means to be Native American in the 21st century. It is so good. I didn't think I would really like it because I don't read a lot of historical fiction. But I actually really loved it. I gave it a 5 out of 5, and I'd probably read it again. So, next book that I read, it's also a historical fiction, but I'm sure that most of you know what it is. It is called The Book Thief by Marcus Zuzak. As you can tell by the title, somebody's going to be stealing some books. But it takes place in Nazi Germany during World War II. And one of my favorite aspects about this book, it is actually narrated by Death himself. I did not know that whenever I picked up the book. I knew of The Book Thief, but I didn't know that Death would be narrating it. But the story revolves around this little girl named Liesel Meminger, and she ends up in a foster home with her foster dad named Hans and her foster mom. And during her time there, she learns how to read and develops a really deep love for books. And this story really tells about how impactful words could be and how impactful books can be, because Liesel ends up sharing her books with her neighbors, but also with the Jew that they hide inside their basement. And it really does explore the power of words, the impact of kindness in such a tragic time, and the resilience of the human spirit in a time of disaster. So, I loved The Book Thief, loved Liesel Meminger, and I love Hans. It made me cry. So I also gave this book a 5 out of 5. So, next book that I read, it's actually an autobiography. I kind of looped it into the historical fiction, even though it's not fiction. It's still history. It is another one that takes place during Nazi Germany in World War II. And it is called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It is the first autobiography that I've read in a really long time, but I loved this book. It is not for the faint of heart, and it goes into really deep topics and really traumatic things. So I wouldn't just be handing this to my niece. I would have it for yourself. But it talks about Viktor Frankl's experience going through 4 different concentration camps, and the last one that he ended up at is Auschwitz. He is a psychiatrist, so he is a doctor, and you get to see that he had an advantage as like a Jew in these camps, because the more valuable of a person you were, the higher up you were. But not only was he an advantage like physically, but he had advantages emotionally, because he was a psychiatrist. He knew how to look inward and look at his feelings and the suffering and how he was feeling and how to wrestle with that. And so he talks about his experience as a Holocaust survivor, detailing like the mental and emotional challenges faced in these Nazi concentration camps. And it talks about how what he saw, like not only what happened to him, but what he saw, very emotional, very tragic. And then the second part of the book, which I found to be really difficult to get through, because I'm not a psychology major, I'm not a psychiatrist, but it talks about Viktor Frankl's what was that word? Psychotherapeutic approach to finding meaning in life, even through the darkest times. And it's called logotherapy. So let me see what a note I had for it. Finding meaning in all forms of existence, even in the midst of profound suffering. This book serves as both a memoir and also as a philosophical exploration on how someone can find meaning in life or meaning in the little things, and being able to reflect that onto themselves, and how to truly find happiness and content. Or maybe happiness wouldn't be like a word best fit for this situation, more like content and finding reasons to keep going, even if they're going through something really hard and they don't know if they can get through it. So that one was a fantastic book. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. The only reason I didn't give it a 5 out of 5 is because I personally found the second part of the book to be really hard to get through. So that's the only reason why I gave it a 4 out of 5. If I was more intellectually there, maybe I would be able to enjoy the second part as much as I did. All right, so the next book I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite movies of all time. Denzel Washington is my favorite actor, and he plays in this film. I don't know how many times I've seen this movie. It's one of my favorite. And so whenever I saw it, I had to pick it up and I had to read it. It's called The Bone Collector by Jeffrey Deaver. It is a psychological crime thriller. I love crime. I love thriller. And Jeffrey Deaver did such a good job. It's a thicker book. I've been progressively getting books that have been bigger and bigger. But Jeffrey Deaver talks about this one retired or former forensics investigator named Lincoln Rhyme. Lincoln Rhyme got paralyzed on the job a couple years before, and so he's paralyzed from the neck down. And it talks about how Lincoln Rhyme gets brought back into the world of crime whenever there's a mass, or not, it is a mass because there's a lot of people that died. There's a widespread of murders that are happening in his city, and he ends up getting partnered up with a patrol cop named Amelia Sachs. And with his keen intellect and her courage and her physical abilities, they end up trying to track down this sadistic killer called the Bone Collector. And this novel talks about forensic science. It talks about, it's very suspenseful and a race against time, so there's not so many victims. It goes into really gruesome details. But if you've ever seen the movie, it is a great movie. And you know what? The book is even better. So we love Lincoln Rhyme. We love Jeffrey Deaver. We love Amelia Sachs. So if you're into crime thrillers, this is the book for you. Okay. So next book I have is one that my boyfriend suggested that I should read because he loves this book. And it is called I Am Legend with Richard Matheson. It is a thriller. It's a science fiction thriller. And it follows this character named Robert Neville. And it is during a time where it's post-apocalyptic and vampire-like creatures are is a global pandemic, and it seems like Robert Neville is the only sole survivor. He is the only human to have survived this pandemic. He wrestles with the thought of why he was the only one, because his wife dies and his kid dies. It's not I'm not including like spoilers, but he's the sole survivor and he had people around him that he loves. So during the day, Robert Neville goes out and searches for supplies and builds up his little fortress that he has around his house. And during the nighttime, he's fending off these vampire-like creatures, especially his neighbor. I don't know what it is with his neighbor, but that was like the main person that Robert Neville kind of wrestled with. I think why is because that was his connection to like humanity and a past life that he had, and he didn't want to kill his neighbor because that's a guy that he used to ride to work with every single day, and he thought that there may be a hope that all of this could be reversed. But he fends off from these vampire-like creatures, not only like physically, but like mentally. They're mean and they talk crap about him, and they're very intellectual creatures. So Neville, all throughout the book, he wrestles with the thought of isolation and loss and what he's truly going through, also trying to find a meaning in his life. Why does he keep fighting? And you get to see through his eyes how he feels, and it's really, I struggle with loneliness. I think anybody struggles with loneliness. Nobody really wants to truly be alone. And this book really makes you feel for Robert Neville. But it struggles with like survival, loneliness, and towards the end you start thinking about what does it mean, like what's the difference in between humanity and monstrosity. And as the title, you may be saying, I am legend. Well, I think Robert Neville himself, he is a legend going through all of this all by himself, and he is a symbol of hope, but he also is kind of like a symbol of fear. Whenever you read the book, you kind of will realize that. Depends on what perspective you're kind of looking through. But yeah, I liked I Am Legend. It does kind of tie in some scientific stuff. It was really funny. There's one part that Robert Neville even goes out and gets a microscope and it tries to figure out how to work a microscope. I could not imagine trying to work a microscope and trying to see all these things without having education background. I thought there's some slight humor in there. But yeah, I Am Legend, I think I gave a 4 out of 5. All right. Next book that I'm going to be talking about, it is also not for the faint of heart. It goes into a lot of gruesome details. It is also a science fiction. It is called Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Bazterica. Yeah, Augustina Bazterica. Science fiction. And it is a dystopian novel. So this is also something that might happen in the future or something like that. And what happens is all the animals on Earth all get infected with this sort of virus, and now humans cannot eat animals. So they turn to cannibalism. And it is surrounded by this character. His name is Marcos. He is actually a worker at a processing plant that produces this special meat, human meat. And all throughout the book, you kind of see how Marcos is not okay with humans becoming meat, and he is fighting against a society that has normalized cannibalism. They don't talk about it. They don't talk about where these things come from, which is kind of like in real life. People don't usually like to think about what happened at these factories and where their meat really comes from and how all this comes to be. So I like that kind of like reflection. But he wrestles with like the moral implications of what he's doing as a living, because he works as a processing plant. What does it mean to have a human processing plant? It goes into more details about what is good meat, what is bad meat, what is exquisite meat, what does it mean to go hunting. I thought that was like one of the most disturbing things, was hunting. He is deeply disturbed by these dehumanizing consequences of the society that has normalized cannibalism. And it goes into talking about ethics and what it means to be human and be surrounded by people of a society that has normalized something that is really disgusting. So and of course something happens with Marcos, and I think it makes him quite literally go insane, which I'm not going to be, I don't want to spoil anything. But yeah, very gruesome book. I really loved the book. Probably would read it again. It's messed up. I'm sorry. All right, so next book I'm going to be talking about, it's just like a short little manga panel that I read. Somebody from my Facebook last year suggested that I should read Juji Ito. And I had some Juji Ito, but I just never picked up and read it. But I decided to read one of his depictions of Frankenstein. Everybody knows who Frankenstein is, but I'm still going to talk about it. It's just a gothic fiction, and it talks about a scientist, a mad scientist, to say the least, of Victor Frankenstein, and he becomes obsessed with creating life, playing God himself. And he uses his knowledge and his education that he kept pursuing of science to make something out of different body parts. He was digging up graves and putting them back together like a puzzle piece. He was stealing them, by the way. He wasn't, of course you're going to be, if you're in the graveyard. Yeah, well, anyway, he ends up, after he creates his monster, he becomes disgusted by it. And so Victor abandons his own creation, and so that monster or that creature is super intellectual, and it hurts him. He starts to figure out what emotions are, and his own creator abandoned him because he thought he was so ugly. And so this creature goes out into Europe, starts like analyzing like human behavior and what true love is to have for your own like creation, like people's kids. And he gets very like envious, and it turns into revenge because he was very mad at his creator. Nobody likes him because of how he looks. And so it leads to a very like destructive and tragic ending for Victor Frankenstein, for his family, for himself. And it really goes, this themes of this little manga panel is showing like morality, revenge, the consequences of playing God, and it's a great gothic literature. Loved it. I'll probably pick up the book this coming year so I could read it. But there was one quote that I really loved, and it's called, "Beware, for I am fearless, therefore powerful." I loved it. Anyway, I'm definitely like a quotes person. And yeah. So, the next 3 titles that I'm going to be talking about, they are series. And the first one that I'm going to be talking about is, if anybody knows me, I am a huge Twilight fan. And I read the Twilight series, except Midnight Sun, which I have back here, right there. I haven't picked it up yet and read it. But I've read the main 4, so Twilight, New Moon, Eclipse, and Breaking Dawn. Loved the books. So I love Bella and Edward's relationship. Now, if you've never read Twilight, I suggest that you skip this section, because I'm going to kind of go into spoilers just a little bit, just because I feel like everybody knows what Twilight is. This is a series written by Stephanie Meyer. It is a romantic fantasy, and it's about vampires and werewolves and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go into detail what Twilight is, because I think everybody and their mamas know what Twilight is. But I will say, I'm a huge fan of the movies. So whenever I read the books, I love Bella and Edward's relationship so much more in the books. And also something that's very surprising. Everybody knows that I am a Edward fan. I am Team Edward all the way. Always have, always will be. And the movies really made me hate Jacob. I know a lot of people, I never really understood why would you really like Jacob until I read the books. Surprisingly, New Moon is my favorite book out of the series. And guess what? Edward's not really there very much. It's just mostly about Bella and Jacob and their relationship. I loved that. I thought I was going to hate New Moon because, oh, here we go. It's all about them getting to know each other and her starting to develop feelings for Jacob. But loved the book. I actually had some critiques about Bella herself. At some points, I hated Bella. I hated how selfish she was. And I think Stephanie Meyer even wrote, I think into Breaking Dawn, talking about how Bella would say, like, my Jacob. And even though she's with Edward, and she recognizes how toxic that was. Bella even recognized, saying, like, I can't be saying that, but I have to. I don't know. They can't do my boy Edward dirty like that, okay? No. Anyway. But I love the Twilight books, love the movies, and I will say I gave every single book a 5 out of 5, except Breaking Dawn. I think Breaking Dawn, the movie, was so much better than the book. I would have been completely fine if the second part of Breaking Dawn was awful. It was very, like, thrown together, Volturi, and, like, 20 plus different vampire families that were showing up. I couldn't absorb all that information. It was too much. It was too rushed. It was just, I did not like it. And then also, I think what made me realize is once I read the books, how much I really do feel for Charlie. I felt for Charlie in Charlie is Bella's dad. I felt for him in the movies because you know that Jacob like jumps in front of Charlie and turns into a werewolf in Breaking Dawn, because Jacob wants him to know that the world isn't what you think it is. And Charlie's left in the dark so much. He doesn't understand what's happening with his daughter. He doesn't understand what's happening with the boy that he also raised along with his best friend that just turned into a dog in front of him. But I also love this detail in the books, is that Charlie ends up with, I can't remember what her name is, but she also has the two kids that join Jacob's clan, or pack, not clan. Anyway, joins his pack in Breaking Dawn. Those two kids, they actually end up together. Charlie and the mom of that group. So they can both kind of like, at least he has someone to vent to and kind of get some answers from it. Because if they were to tell Charlie, then he would get in trouble with the Volturi and so on and so forth. Anyway, that's Twilight. 5 out of 5, except for Breaking Dawn, which I did not like. All right, next book I'm going to be talking about, it's a huge TikTok thing that has blown up, and it's called Fourth Wing. Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. I've read both of them. I loved Fourth Wing. Fourth Wing is written by Rebecca Yarros, and it is also a romantic fantasy. More about dragons and wyvern and venom and all that stuff. It follows a woman. Her name is Violet Sorrengail, and she was meant to be a scribe, and her mom, which is a general or something like that of Besgaiath, had told her that she is not becoming a scribe, she is becoming a rider. A rider means that you're going to be flying on those dragons, fighting people who are on the border, and so on and so forth. Well, she wasn't planning her whole life. She loved the books, she loved being in them, being able to translate stuff, and now she gets to a point where she is being thrown into a quadrant that she is not a big fan of, and she meets some people along the way, including her, I'm not going to say anything, she meets some of her best friends there, and she also meets this character named Xaden. And it goes into what it means to like bond dragons, and she discovers some truths that have been hidden from her, and what it means to be like a hero, and like, should you care about people beyond the border, and everything's a lie. She's very conflicted, but it is definitely a romance heavy thing. I really look for character development, and especially in Iron Flame. I can't really talk about Iron Flame if you haven't read Fourth Wing, because I feel like it's a major spoiler since it's the second part of the series. I feel like Violet Sorrengail could be so much stronger if her whole personality was not just surrounded by one guy. You can say that you're strong, you can say all these things, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't truly show it. Another thing that really irked me about this book is how many times she's gonna say that she is weak and fragile and small, and if I hear that one more time, I am jumping off a cliff. But loved Fourth Wing. It was one of the fantasy things that really brought out this year. I was just like, man, I love this. And then Iron Flame kind of put a bad taste in my mouth, but she signed on to a 5-book series, So I'm just going to pretend that I didn't read Iron Flame. I'm just going to remember bits and pieces from Iron Flame and just keep going. And maybe I won't absolutely hate all these characters. All right. So last but not least, I'm going to be talking about my favorite series of all time I have ever read over Twilight. That is a huge statement to be saying. It is called Red Rising. So it is written by the author Pierce Brown, and it is a science fiction. I am not huge on, well, I didn't think I was, kind of like into space and traveling from different planets and all this different like world building and very like science fiction heavy. Didn't think I would like it because obviously, as you can tell, I was more into kind of like basic fantasy, some romance thrown into there. But no, Pierce Brown has done something to me. It has changed something in me, okay? So Red Rising is part of a 7-book series, and Pierce Brown is writing the 7th book right now. So the ones that I have so far is Red Rising, Golden Age or Golden Sun, Morning Star, Iron Gold, and Dark Age. That's the one that I'm on right now. I'm about halfway through. But it talks about, it's like a dystopian science fiction that takes place on, I'm just going to be talking about the first book because if I talk about more books, then it's going to be a spoiler. It takes place on the planet Mars, and it follows this character named Darrow. He is a member of the Red class, which is the lowest caste in a color-coded system, which Gold is the highest. And Golds are almost seen as gods themselves. And from a Red's point of view, and from all the other color point of view, Gold is the oppressive class. And so Darrow ends up finding out that everything that he has been told is a lie. And so he infiltrates the Golds by transforming himself, and he ends up joining into their elite training academy and to incite or start a revolution or a downfall of the Golds. And it really does talk about rebellion, power, and sacrifice. Sacrifice especially. And you get to see inside Darrow's head, like, how much he is putting at risk and how much he is sacrificing. how many emotionally turmoil things that he goes through, how many physical challenges that he goes through, and what it means to be a Red, what it means to be himself. And it really does, Pierce Brown does an excellent job talking about action, which I don't think a lot of books do too well, because you're, in my case, whenever I'm reading action, sometimes I get lost in the words and I just pretend, okay, yeah, they're fighting, so I'm just going to make up my own fighting scene. No, Pierce Brown does a great job painting it for yourself. He talks about politics, he talks about he really does do world building so well. And it's not like other fantasies where they get lost in the world building and you kind of forget who you're talking about. He does a great job setting a futuristic setting that you'd be able to understand. And it talks about, this book is mainly about rebellion and resilience. Those are the two best words that I can put for this series, is rebellion and resilience. Love Darrow, love his character development. I love him. Pierce Brown does a great job with all character developments. And you know what? Pierce Brown, if you fall in love with a character, just don't do it. Pierce Brown does not care about just killing off anybody, so don't get attached to anybody. Seriously, I'd love to meet Pierce Brown in person. He is the best writer I have found so far this year, and maybe even ever. I love Pierce Brown. I suggest that if these books are a little bit too big for you and you kind of get overwhelmed really easily and you kind of get bored of it, I'd suggest the audiobook. Whoever does the narration of the audiobook, fantastic. So the books that I read this year that I am not including in this review is Verity by Colleen Hoover. It is a thriller, and as if anybody knows me, I'm not a big Colleen Hoover fan. So this one is probably the best that she has written out of the couple books that I've read from her. The Maidens by Alex McCollodes. Did not like this book at all. It was very disappointing. Last year I read The Silent Patient, and I loved The Silent Patient. I was so excited to read this, but it is not a book for me. The Silent Woods by Kimmy Cunningham Grant. It was alright. There were some empty parts. I felt that was kind of like a lull period, but it was alright. It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I'm not a Colleen Hoover fan. Twisted Love and Twisted Games by Anna Wong. It is a romantic fiction. It is just pure romance. I like her writing, but there's some very cringy quotes in there. Just gonna move on. If He Had Been With Me by Laura Nowlin. It is also a romantic fiction. I really loved this book. It just didn't seem very impactful for me to review this time around. But huge plot twist at the very end. Highly suggest this one. Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. It is a romantic fantasy. It's alright. A Court of Thorns and Roses and A Court of Mist and Fury. Everybody has been blowing up about this. This is also by Sarah J. Maas. It is a romantic fantasy. And it's alright. Not my favorite, but it's alright. I'm not going to read any more of the series if that tells you anything, and I think that I'm going to upset a lot of people by saying that. And last but not least is The Serpent and the Wings of Night. This was just on a whim. This is by Carissa Broadbent. It is also a romantic fantasy. And the best thing I could say about this book, it is a vampire Hunger Games. So, and there's one quote in there that makes me want to crawl out of my skin. So, it's alright. I enjoyed it. I may read the next one. I don't know. I've got some other books that I kind of want to read. What I decided to do as a tradition now is to choose one book from this whole, all 28 books that I read this year, and decide to do the book of the year of 2023. My book of the year is Morning Star by Pierce Brown. This is the third book of the series. I can't say much about it without spoiling, but best book ever. To the point that I am going to be rereading all the Red Rising series and putting notations and quotes that I love throughout the books. If you are a huge quote person, I suggest reading the Red Rising series. Pierce Brown has a way with words, and guess what? He is, after he gets done with this series of science fiction, he said that he's going to be moving to fantasy. And he was talking about in an interview that he doesn't want to sign on to another book series like this, 7 books. And that's even better, because that means I don't know, even if he turns into a series, I don't care. I'm still going to read everything that he puts out. I've got to see if he writes even more books. But the Red Rising series, thank you, Trey, for suggesting this. Best series ever. Cannot talk any more hype about this. So, but that's it for my book review of 2023. If you've made it through this whole video, thank you. I know this is really long. That's why I couldn't talk about all 28 books. But if you have any suggestions of books that I should read this coming year, leave them in the comments below. And thank you for watching.